dollars in weapons that have been seized by the Taliban on their offensive across Afghanistan. Now, there hasn't been a thorough accounting anywhere I could find exactly of what the Taliban were able to capture, what's going to be somewhat useful to them, and what is, maybe a nice meme or image, but really isn't anything other than an expensive lawn ornament. They may be able to operate the Black Hawk helicopters a time or two. They apparently captured an A-29 Super Tornado attack aircraft. I'm not sure if they're ever going to be able to operate this, or if any of the Black Hawks or A-29s that they actually got their hands on were operational and functional. They could have been missing key components, even though from some of the pictures you can see it does look like these are intact. Now, it's pretty clear that the Taliban captured a lot of small arms. We're talking mostly about like M4s and M16s, but also, smaller like anti-armor weapons or maybe surface-to-air weapons, hand grenades, a few others that like I couldn't exactly identify. There were some drones that they had captured. Again, I'm not sure if they have all the equipment need to operate more of the advanced weapons. Obviously, with like an M4, all you need is the clip and the bullets, and to be able to pull the trigger. And I'm sure they take the firing pins out of all those things or anything. So I'm sure all of these are actually functional. The Humvees and the mine-resistant vehicles, it seems they did capture a lot of those. There's some video that seemed to show Taliban actually using some of these, so at least some of them appear to be functional. That being said, it's while there's video of them capturing a lot, that it's still unclear exactly all what was able to be used. Now, on top of all the other weapons, and obviously, the concerns there are pretty clear and resemble, of course, the collapse of the Iraq army, during the ISIS blitzkrieg in like the rise of the Islamic State 2013, 2014. And ISIS was able to put all these weapons to quite a bit of use, especially like the armored vehicles and the Humvees, using them for like suicide attacks on bases. And so there may be a lot of use for the Taliban in these weapons. It may help them to, maintain their control over the country. Should other groups try to rise up and overthrow them, it could help them to defeat those type of groups. I'm not sure. Maybe they could sell some of it back to the US. Maybe the US would be willing to negotiate for the Super Tornadoes and the Black Hawks, even if it's just like for PR stuff to get that back. Or still kind of surprised the US hasn't targeted it with airstrikes and just blown all that stuff up yet. Now, so again, all those weapons, I think the problems are kind of predictable where they could come, and then too, also just sowing, problems in the region, arms trade in the region, as we're going to see. I'm likely, all the Taliban already have their AKs, and now they're apparently picking up the M4s, and so maybe they're going to leave their AK at home, but maybe they're going to have a whole lot of AKs to sell, and so we could see this maybe fuel insurgencies or rebellions, or different actors, militias, governments, even in other countries. Maybe I would have my eye most like on Pakistan or Kashmir as the regions for those weapons to go. But the weapons I really find, not weapons necessarily, but things that the Taliban capture that I think are really interesting. This is done at the reporting by Ken Kleppenstein at The Intercept. So there's reasons to be skeptical behind all of this. I don't think he is the reporter I would absolutely trust, but there is some evidence that the Taliban did capture these devices and have at least tried to use them. I've seen some of this video, so I'm his claims are his claims, and I'm be very careful to point out what he is saying. But it does seem that the Taliban had captured some of these devices that I believe are called Hind, but they essentially scan biometrics. Now the big question, and Kleppenstein says that the Taliban will have access, is the U.S. has apparently collected data on about 80% of Afghans, their biometric data. This means their iris scans, what their position in the government is, all this kind of stuff. I'm not sure if it has everything down to maybe like phone number and address, but apparently would have like who worked in the Afghan government and what their role was. And so Klippenstein says they have the access to that information. Now, even then, just with the biometric devices, they could probably put them to nefarious use, or potentially sell them to different states who may be able to put them to better use. So maybe the Taliban don't have they don't have an intelligence agency. They might not have the ability to crack this and find the data, but they could sell it to Pakistan, Iran, China, or a different country that maybe could, access that kind of data. And millions and tens of millions of Afghans have now essentially had their data compromised by the U.S. and are neglect for it. So that part of it is really disturbing to me. Again, they definitely had these devices. Now, how much they could use them and what they'll use them for is still the question. But this just goes to show how poorly the U.S. nation building effort in Afghanistan has gone, and how we gave all these very advanced weapons to all these, different actors in Afghanistan who obviously didn't really have any interest in maintaining them or protecting them, and have just let them fall into the hands of the people the U.S. was fighting the past 20 years. So very interesting. Just again, a big show of failure for the U.S. nation building effort in Afghanistan. I think that's all I have on the weapons for now. I'll continue to update this, especially the Hind and the biometric data. If we find out that the Taliban are going to be able to access this could be an extraordinary tool if they choose to really carry out a very totalitarian and brutal reign over Afghanistan. Else going on is that the Afghan accounts, the government accounts, are being frozen. First, the U.S., this was reported by the Washington Post, froze the assets that were in the U.S. of the Afghan government. Now, it's unclear of how much money that is. Apparently, in April, the Afghan central bank held $9.4 billion in reserves. Now, of course, 80% of the Afghan budget comes from the U.S., so if a lot of this money is held in the U.S., I wouldn't be surprised. I know that, in the past week or so, they have started to, I'm sure, see cracks in the Afghan government, and so maybe they had looked to get some of the money, some of the cash out of Afghanistan before the Taliban took over. But it's unclear of where all the, $9 or so billion of assets the Afghan government should have is. Some of it's in the U.S., clearly. Some of it's in their IMF accounts that were also suspended. Now, the IMF kind of put this out like, oh, this is a normal thing we do when governments, kind of by this method, not exactly something that's enshrined in the country's tradition for the new group to take over. They do this, but they're saying that there's a lack of clarity surrounding the recognition who's in control of the government, so they suspended the accounts. In one way, this may be a good thing in case like Ghazni or whoever else was a former member of the Afghan government's going on a massive spending spree. However, if the Taliban are looking to be a government and to have traffic cops and all that, then they're going to have the central bank or something. That's the institution that Afghanistan has to pay their workers. Then cutting off this could be something that makes it very hard for the Taliban to operate their state and could cause a lot of instability in Afghanistan. But it's yet to be seen exactly what's going to happen with this money, but it's something definitely to keep an eye on. We're talking about billions of dollars here, and I'm sure a lot of people who would like to steal it. Interesting meetings going on yesterday in Afghanistan. Well, I guess Wednesday now, for people listening to the show. The former Afghan president Karzai met with Taliban at I believe, the home of Abdullah, who was also there. So it was Karzai, Abdullah, and then the Taliban, officials that went to meet with them. This is the, I guess, slight effort that's being made. Essentially, people who are in the Afghan government, but I guess had better relationship with the Taliban than the president who fled the country, Ashraf Ghani, or maybe people who are involved in the Afghan military before, Karzai, Abdullah, and I believe Hetmachar all a part of this group that are looking to facilitate some sort of transition to the Taliban. I'm not sure what the Taliban interest in meeting with Karzai is, and if this is just something they're doing to see what the guy has to say and really have no interest in building a deeper relationship, or if they're really going to try to do some kind of transitional government kind of thing. Now, I understand that today, was it August 19th, 2021, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, the new name of the country declared by the Taliban. They say it's their Independence Day. I believe they are now waving a white flag that's, got some writing on it. It's not just plain white. And that is apparently what they want to be the new flag of Afghanistan. I guess this makes sense to talk about this right now because I've seen some pictures and videos of what are claimed to be protests going on in Afghanistan opposing the Taliban. The best I could tell is that the people opposing the Taliban are waving a lot of the old red, black, and green flags, whereas the Taliban people are waving like the newer white flags. I'm not sure how many of the actual ones that the Taliban have been like professionally made or how they're doing it, but I have seen some flags that seem to resemble the flag that the Taliban are now using. So that the protests are going on in Afghanistan. There's a lot of reporting from the Western media that these protests are breaking out into conflicts and the Taliban are acting brutally against the protesters. To be honest, it does seem like there are some places where violence has broke out at these protests, although nothing I have seen makes it clear that the Taliban were the instigators and sole proprietors of the violence. There were some cases where it seemed that there were warning shots fired and then people were trampled, and from the position of the Taliban, I'm not, firing warning shots is something that happens by quite a few actors in Afghanistan. So it's not even, I guess, clear to me that the Taliban would have been the actors that fired those shots, but if they were, that they were necessarily, trying to get a bunch of people killed or anything like that. Other videos are surfacing alleging that the Taliban are carrying out reprisal killings. A lot of this stuff to me seems hard to verify. I don't necessarily doubt that to some extent is going on. The Taliban were victims of war crimes by people in the Afghan government over the past 20 years. And so not that I'm necessarily endorsing these reprisal killings. However, if, they're killing some guy that was the commander of the Afghan army in this province or that province of Afghanistan, it's not quite the same thing as them just pulling some random girl off the street of Kabul and executing her for not having on the appropriate coverings or something like that. Some of this, I think, is just a part of the brutal warfare that's been going on in Afghanistan. So with all that said, then there's the question of what's happening to the Americans in Afghanistan, where this week I've heard people estimate that there's between 10 and 15,000 American citizens or permanent residents of the U.S. that are currently in Afghanistan. It's not at all clear to me that or even a majority of these people are in Kabul, although that would be my guess. I don't know if anybody's actually put out those numbers. I have heard that there are some NGO type groups that are getting flights out of Afghanistan from places other than the Kabul airport. And so just because somebody is, let's say, in Herat or in, Kunduz or something like that, and they're looking to get out of Afghanistan, I don't think it necessarily means that they have to get to the Kabul airport to get out of the country. There may be other options. And, who knows, that they may be more productive than what the U.S. is trying to do at the Kabul airport. They say they're doing about 20 flights a day on the C-17s, which officially I think could carry like under 200 passengers each. Now, I'm not sure if they're breaking those rules and they're loading these things up 600 people deep like they were that one C-17. It would certainly seem to make sense to try to put as many people on these planes as possible. The State Department has said that they are not able to test for COVID on site, and so if you're interested in that, apparently they are not bothering trying to do that. There was a press conference with Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Milley. that was Wednesday, I believe, and from that press conference, it didn't sound like there were all the official processes even in place at this point to evacuate Afghans from Afghanistan, including there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity what they're going to do about the Afghans that do not have passports. And so the entire evacuation part is a mess. Wendy Sherman, who's the Deputy U.S. Secretary of State, did say, again, I believe this is on Wednesday, that the Taliban were allowing U.S. citizens safe passage to get to Kabul Airport. I guess at least if they're in Kabul. I'm not exactly sure if that works for people who are, in other areas of the country. General Austin said that the U.S. couldn't, move into Kabul to extract U.S. citizens or anything like that. They just don't have the assets at this point, is what he's saying. And this is interesting because this is the statement from the U.S. government. However, again, if you watch the mainstream media, particularly CNN today, was reporting that there was no way for U.S. citizens in Kabul to get to the Kabul airport. I saw Jeff Scroll, who writes at Task and Purpose, and usually writes some pretty good stuff. He had put out a tweet with a video saying that he didn't think that people could get to the Kabul airport. And I in fairness, if that video is accurate, he says a friend he knows in Kabul sent it to him, then it seems likely that it would be very hard for an American to get to the Kabul airport, although I'm not exactly sure of how much it's the Taliban really preventing this versus just kind of the chaos at the airport and the many people that are trying to get through the airport. The Taliban are maintaining order, quote unquote, outside the airport. I don't like to say maintaining order like that, but they are, I think, doing warning shots, maybe using whips, or at one point I read a story saying chains to try to contain the mobs trying to get into the airport. Kind of a double-edged sword thing here, though, because if they don't contain the mobs, then the U.S. is going to blame the Taliban for the chaos at the airport and saying that that's why nobody could get out of the country. But then if they, put the mobs under control in the way the Taliban do, some people end up at least very hurt. So the situation again in Kabul and Afghanistan is not great right now. Now, it's not the level of violence that maybe you would expect for the Taliban to be taking over, but at the same time, there does seem to be some conflict going on, some people getting killed, protests going on in various areas of Afghanistan. But in part, I have seen videos too of these protests going on and the Taliban guys walking around with their machine guns, and they're not opening fire on the crowds, right? Like the U.S. allies in General al-Sisi did in Egypt, or like our allies in Bahrain did. Rather, the Taliban at this point, they're not like just turning their guns onto the crowd or anything like that. And so that's to the best of my ability describing what I could see going on in Afghanistan. Biden said that he's not going to withdraw troops until all Americans are out of the country. If you just look at the pace that they're bringing the people out of the country, the Americans and the Afghans out of the country at this point, I mean, I can see it taking months for them to get everyone out. They are not doing this efficiently at all. And so if Biden is serious about that, then this could push us past the official supposed to be withdrawal date of August 31st, and when we're less than 2 weeks out, we're just not bringing people out at enough of a pace. The U.S. flew F-18s over Kabul in a show of force to the Taliban, saying, "Don't mess with us or we will bomb you." At the same time, I'm not sure the U.S. wants to, press this button too much with the Taliban, because while the U.S. could drop bombs on the Taliban and, potentially kill a lot of Taliban leadership and members of the Taliban, they would have to kill an awful lot of innocent civilians to do it. And there's a lot of innocent Americans and Afghan citizens who were allied with the U.S. and an awful lot of U.S. troops at the Kabul airport that would be under extreme danger if any real fighting broke out. So I'm not quite sure this is the route that the U.S. wants to go. And that's something that a lot of hots seem just completely unable to recognize reckon with. I'm seeing people like Nikki Haley on Twitter saying that, oh my God, how dare the Biden administration attempt in any way to have any talks with the Taliban? And it's like, listen, lady, we gotta have talks with the Taliban right now because they're the armed force that controls almost all of Afghanistan, except the Kabul airport. And if we want to continue to evacuate these people in this relatively peaceful manner that's happened so far, the only way we're going to do it is by maintaining this contact with the Taliban and not trying to push them around and stick, our thumb in their eye and really show them up and tell them, oh yeah, we're still the boss around here and you're going to take orders from us. They might have different ideas if that's the U.S. tactic approach here. All right, so interesting. We have the son of Ahmed Masood, his name again, Ahmed Masood, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post titled "The Mujahideen Resistance to the Taliban Begins Now, but We Need Your Help." This is an appeal for arms, ammo, and supplies from the U.S. to help Masood and the group that he's bringing together. That includes the former vice president of Afghanistan, Saleh, to try to, I guess, fight back against the Taliban. They're starting their resistance from the Panjshir Valley, which is, I guess, a pretty fortified area, and it may be a real problem for the Taliban if they try to go in there and rout these guys or something like that, especially if there's a lot of consolidated anti-Afghan forces. For anybody who's watching the show right now, you can see that the lighter colored area of Afghanistan is the province and the area that's not held by the Taliban, and this is about the area where that light blue triangle is, that this resistance is starting to form. The real threat that I have right now is that the CIA is going to see this as an opportunity. The U.S. is going to see this as an opportunity, and rather trying to let the Afghans work out, find some kind of balance in that country that allows some kind of stability and less fighting, violence, murdering going on. But I'm not exactly optimistic that that's going to happen, especially when we see this kind of stuff being written in the Washington Post. And there's so much concern and people screaming about, oh, China's going to get involved, China's going to get involved. I even saw some guy post on Facebook yesterday, what the U.S. needs to do now is maintain some kind of insurgency in Afghanistan so no other country could have their hegemony there and control over it. Let the Afghans do what they want. Their lives matter too, and we don't get to foster instability in their country to, deliver some kind of minor geopolitical hurdle to Russia and China. Interesting article from U.S. News, or I guess it's from Reuters, reprinting here in U.S. News, about how the Taliban claim to have engineered the political collapse of Afghanistan. Now, this is mostly from Taliban sources here, in particular the, I guess, kind of de facto leader of the Taliban right now, Mullah Baradar, and essentially what they put forward is that this didn't happen over a couple of weeks, that over the past few months the Taliban have been making connections and forming ties with low-level military and government officials and also with tribal leaders. And then as they started to make gains, which did happen in this article, according to Mullah Baradar, faster than the Taliban expected, but nonetheless they continued to make these gains, and then of course Ghani left, and so it fell really quick. But they said that the Taliban, weren't really able to, didn't really want to fight a battle, and essentially, just turned a whole bunch of people and went in, and once people realized the Taliban were the more important power faction, they just switched sides. And that's something that happens apparently quite frequently in Afghanistan, and even places where there was expected to be holds out and pockets of resistance in Afghanistan, like Maraza-e Sharif. The city fell very quickly because people changed sides. Now I'm guessing that there's a little bit more violence to all this than the Taliban talk talked about when they say they made connections with the low-level military and government officials. Well, what happened when their bosses said that they didn't want to go along with this? Maybe they were taken out back and killed by the Taliban, then the lower-level guy became in charge, and the Taliban made a deal with him. But all the same, it's not like you have major battles breaking out across Afghanistan, and this take from the Taliban's perspective of how it happened, I think is very interesting, although I do keep in mind that they're looking to make themselves not look so bad in the Western press. All right, now